Alright, so when it comes to Destiny Rising, the best characters aren't just about raw stats. They really shine through their unique abilities, passives, and of course, the weapons they can actually use. Since each character only has access to a limited set of weapon categories, that weapon pool makes a huge difference in how strong they are, especially if we're talking about competitive PvP matches. Some characters feel almost unstoppable when they get the right weapon pairing, while others drop off if they're stuck with weaker options. In this video, we're breaking down my PvE and PvP tier list for Destiny Rising characters. I'll talk about who's dominating the battlefield, who's worth investing in, and maybe even who you can safely skip. Whether you're grinding through tough PvE content or climbing the ranks in PvP, this list should give you a solid idea of which characters will make your life easier and which ones might just hold you back. Let's get into it. I'm quickly moving on to the video, and I'm ranking PvP and PvE characters in Destiny Rising. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. We'll start with PvE first. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Cobber and Atal. Alright, picture this. You are in the middle of a dungeon run. Everything is going great, and then suddenly you realize, oh no, you brought a C-tier character. That is exactly the kind of roller coaster ride Cobber brings to the table in Destiny Rising when it comes to player versus environment battles. On the bright side, he has some pretty decent crowd control thanks to his blinds. If you're the type of player who loves throwing off enemy groups and creating openings for your team, Cobber can definitely give you some fun moments. The tricky part, though, is that he is nowhere near as tanky as Jolder or other higher-tier melee picks. His defensive abilities are useful, but the uptime is frustratingly low. And when you look at his weapons, they just do not really click with his kit. It is like bringing a hammer to a sword fight. Technically it works, but it is not the best fit. Now, Atal is one of those characters who looks amazing on paper. Seriously, when you first check her out, you think, wow, she has flexible affinities, passive health regeneration, and even some neat support options. What could possibly go wrong? And to be fair, she does deliver on the utility side. Her recharge rates are quick, she can throw out abilities back to back, and her ultimate can buff and support the team in a way that feels genuinely helpful. In the middle of a tough fight, having her around can take a bit of the pressure off your main damage dealers. But here is the catch, you do not bring Atal for damage, because her damage is downright terrible. Combine that with the fact that her weapon types are weak and underpowered, and suddenly you are looking at a support character who is kind of trapped in that role. If you expected her to pull her own weight when it comes to taking enemies down, you are going to be disappointed. She is like that friend who shows up to a group project with lots of enthusiasm, but when it is time to actually do the work, you realize they are just there to hand out snacks. So where does that leave us? Cobber is that situational pick who can shine if you time things perfectly, but feels clunky otherwise. And Atal is the cheerleader of the team. Always helpful, but not exactly putting up big numbers on the scoreboard. Both characters have their place, but let's be real. If you are trying to speed through tough player versus environment content, you will want to look higher up the tier list. These two are more like fun side options than serious contenders. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Ningfei, Finola, and Ikora. You know that moment in Destiny Rising where you are building your team and you think, okay, I do not need the absolute best characters, but I want people who can actually pull their weight? That is where the B-tier heroes slide in. They are not bad, far from it. They can definitely hold their own in player versus environment content, but at the same time, they always leave you wishing they had just a little more punch. Let's dive into a few of them and see what makes them tick. First up is Ningfei, our rapid-fire crossbow master. This guy can absolutely shred single targets, and that alone makes him a solid option in the right scenarios. You want to take down a big chunky enemy? Ningfei has got your back. On top of that, he brings some decent shielding and protection, which is always welcome when the battlefield starts getting messy. The problem? His area of effect damage is practically non-existent. Without some sort of buff, his kit feels very one-dimensional. He's like that friend who is amazing at one video game but refuses to touch anything else. Great when the stars align, but kind of a liability when the situation changes. Then we have Finola, a character who screams melee skirmisher from the moment you pick her up. She dives in, causes chaos up close, and then pulls back before things get too dangerous. The sustain she gets from Ember stacks makes her surprisingly resilient during those brawls, and she can definitely put up some respectable disruption in melee. It is fun to watch her weave in and out of combat, keeping enemies on their toes. But Finala's biggest problem is that she just does not bring the kind of raw damage you need to climb higher on the tier list. Sure, she can scrap and stay alive for a while, but when you compare her damage output to more specialized melee characters, she falls short. On top of that, her sustain is only okay. For someone who is supposed to live in the middle of the fight, you really wish she could tank a little harder. It leaves her in that awkward space of being good enough to use, but not strong enough to be anyone's first choice. Now let's talk about Ikora. On paper, she looks absolutely amazing. Nova Bomb? Check. Void Satellites for burst damage? Check. Rocket launchers that can blast enemies in a wide radius? Double check. When you need to clear a room quickly or hit hard in a short skirmish, Ikora is your girl. She is at her best in fights where you can reset and recharge cooldowns between battles. The burst she delivers in those moments can feel downright unfair to enemies. The downside, though, is exactly what you might guess. Cooldowns. Her sustained damage per second, DPS, is just not there. Once you blow through her abilities, you are kind of sitting around waiting for the fireworks to recharge while everyone else is still putting in steady work. It is like inviting a rock star to your party. When they perform, it is legendary. But the rest of the night, you are just watching them recharge in the green room. That is the B-tier experience in a nutshell. Flashes of brilliance, but not enough consistency to move higher up. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Wolf, Gwyn, Umeko, and Xuanwei. If B-tier characters are the solid co-workers who get the job done but rarely surprise you, A-tier heroes are the ones who actually carry the project when things start falling apart. They might not be completely broken like the S-tier legends, but trust me, these characters are dependable, versatile, and fun to play. They hit that sweet spot of being strong enough to make your run smoother without feeling like you are cheating the system. Let's break down a few of the standouts in Destiny Rising's player versus environment scene. Starting with Wolf. This guy is the perfect example of a character who almost sneaks his way into S-tier. First of all, he is easy to get, and that alone makes him a dream for new players who want someone strong without having to grind endlessly. His area of effect damage with his super is great, and if you equip him with grenade launchers or rifles, you also get sustained single target damage that feels really solid. To top it all off, his stacking damage buff means that everything he does just keeps getting stronger as the fight goes on. But Wolf's biggest strength can also be seen as his limitation. He is what you would call a jack of all trades. He does good area of effect damage, he does good single target damage, and he buffs himself along the way, but he never fully dominates in either category. You will not find him completely melting bosses like some of the boss killers, and you will not see him wiping out mobs as fast as the pure area of effect gods. Still, that versatility makes him one of the most reliable characters you can pick up for player versus environment runs. Now, Gwyn is a whole different story. She is a limited mythic 5-star, and she plays exactly like you would expect a high-rarity character to play. Her damage potential is incredible, and she comes loaded with safe mobility and healing that keep her alive far longer than most others. If you learn her rhythm, she feels practically unkillable, darting in and out of fights, healing herself, and constantly refunding abilities. For long runs or tough encounters, Gwyn can make even messy battles look controlled. Of course, she does have her quirks. Gwyn is technically better suited for player versus player combat thanks to her mobility, healing, and those cheeky refund passives. And then there is the shotgun. Depending on how you play it, the shotgun can either be her biggest weakness, putting you too close for comfort and getting you killed, or her biggest strength. If you master it, you can trigger soul fragments quickly, proc her soul reap, and keep the cycle going. Basically, she rewards skilled players and punishes sloppy ones. Moving on to Umeko, and oh boy, this character is a boss killer's dream. She has access to sniper rifles, which already sets her apart from the pack. Her damage multipliers, enemy debuffs, and constant kit recharge all combine into a package that feels laser-focused on deleting bosses. You deal damage, you recharge your tools, you debuff the enemy, and then you do even more damage. It is a satisfying loop that makes Umeko feel powerful every time you line up those shots. That said, her biggest drawback is simple. She does not bring strong area of effect tools. If you're looking to wipe out big waves of enemies quickly, Umeko is not going to be your first pick. But when you are staring down a tough boss fight and need someone who can stay locked in and keep the damage flowing, she is absolutely one of the best options you can bring. Think of her as your secret weapon for the big bads. Finally, we have Xuanwei, and this guy is all about aggression. He brings some really strong area of effect potential with his kit, close range damage with shotguns, and even crowd control effects to keep enemies from overwhelming you. Add in his quick stacking damage multiplier and high uptime on abilities and gadgets, and you have a character who feels like a non-stop damage machine. When played well, he can control the battlefield and make short work of both mobs and mid-tier enemies. The catch? He is fragile if you do not know what you are doing. Xuanwei's reliance on close-range shotguns means that you have to play smart, or you will get yourself killed quickly in endgame content. For players who can master the positioning and pacing, he is a monster. For those who cannot, he becomes a risky gamble. That high-risk, high-reward nature is exactly what makes him A-tier. Powerful enough to shine, but not forgiving enough to break into S-tier. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Tan2, Jolder, Maru, and Estella. Alright, now we are entering the realm of legends. S-tier characters in Destiny Rising's player versus environment mode are the ones that make other characters feel like practice dummies. These heroes don't just contribute, they dominate, control, and basically make you look like a genius for picking them. Let's take a stroll through the creme de la creme and see why these characters are on a completely different level. First up, Tan2. This guy is basically the Swiss Army knife of S-tier. He brings some insanely powerful tools like Well of Radiance and Phosphorus, and his Ascension passives are absolute game changers. With the right light crystal damage boosts, he can become ridiculously strong, giving his whole team a serious damage buff. On top of that, he is one of the best boss killers in the game thanks to his sniper and scout rifles. Sure, he is a little lacking in area of effect damage, and his damage per second playstyle doesn't always mesh perfectly with his healing super. But honestly, when played right, Tan2 feels unstoppable. Next, we have Jolder. If you want someone who can literally take a beating while still dishing out serious damage, Jolder is your go-to. Her kit makes her one of the tankiest characters in the game, but she doesn't lose speed or offensive power. She protects herself, shields her team with her super, and stacks insane damage boosts with Mayhem's star. Essentially, the more damage she takes, the stronger she becomes, which is an amazing feedback loop. Her only real limitation is her sword, which can restrict shooting capabilities against certain bosses if you do not have the Partridge Sky exotic. Even then, she is an absolute powerhouse. Maru brings a completely different flavor to the S-tier table. She is the hybrid defense and artillery expert, capable of tanking massive hits while raining down punishment on bosses. Drop Abyss and Gulf when a boss starts spamming attacks, and suddenly, you are basically untouchable. Maru scales exceptionally well in endgame content and has access to multiple elements, which makes her incredibly versatile. She might have slightly less raw damage compared to some other S and A tier characters, but her sustained damage plus tanking options make her a nightmare for enemies. Estella is the queen of area of effect damage. Her Dragon Summon alone makes her some of the most destructive AoE in the game. But it's not just about summoning a big scary dragon. Playing around her ultimate is essential because it is hands down the strongest DPS ultimate you can use. Pair that with Bad Juju for extended super duration, or Gallows for sustained damage, and you have a character who can absolutely demolish groups of enemies in record time. Her minor drawbacks: Estella doesn't stack as many damage buffs as others, and her healing options are a bit lacking, which is why she is technically on the edge of A tier. Still, when the fight calls for massive AoE destruction, she is the first name you want on your team sheet. So, to sum it up, S-tier characters in Destiny Rising are about raw power, scaling potential, and making you look like a legend no matter the battle. Tan2 is your versatile damage dealer and boss killer, Jolder is your unstoppable tanky bruiser, Maru is the hybrid defense artillery god, and Estella is the AoE monster. Each of them shines in different ways, but they all share one thing: they make player versus environment content feel manageable even in the toughest situations. In short, if you are running S-tier, you are not just playing the game, you are rewriting the rules. These characters are the ones that take skillful play, good timing, and sometimes a little luck to truly master, but when you do, you feel like you can take on anything Destiny Rising throws at you. S-tier is where fun meets efficiency, and honestly, it does not get much better than that. Now let's move on to our PvP list. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Finola and Xuanwei. Alright, let's be real. C-tier player versus player characters in Destiny Rising are the ones that make you sweat a little more than usual. They aren't terrible, but you are definitely going to notice their weaknesses when the action heats up. Take Finola, for example. In player versus environment, she can rely on her melee effects and ember stacks to stay alive, but in player versus player, things get trickier. You can't always reach your enemies the way you want, which makes her sustain a little shaky. That doesn't mean she is useless, far from it. Finala can still brawl up close and disrupt opponents, and if you are clever about positioning, she can catch people off guard. But let's face it, in fast-paced PvP matches, one slip and her reliance on melee can leave her vulnerable. She is the type of character where you need to be extra mindful of distance because miscalculating can be painful. Then there is Xuan Wei, who is basically a glass cannon in C-tier form. If you can close the gap, his damage output is massive. He can tear through opponents in seconds, making him feel like a monster in the right hands. But the problem is that closing the gap is easier said than done. Snipers, pulse rifles, and scout rifles are everywhere, and if you play him recklessly, you are going to get picked off before you can even swing your shotguns. So the story with C-tier PvP characters is clear. They can shine in bursts, but they require smart play and careful positioning. Finala and Xuan Wei both have their moments, but their weaknesses, melee reliance and vulnerability at range, keep them from rising higher. They are more situational picks than consistent winners, and you need to know exactly when and how to use them to avoid getting frustrated. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Jolder, Maru, and Ningfei. Alright, stepping up to B-tier player versus player in Destiny Rising is where things start to get interesting. These characters aren't dominating every match like S-tier legends, but they still have some serious tools that can make a difference if you play smart. Let's start with Jolder. In PvE, she is basically unstoppable, a tanky powerhouse with incredible damage boosts. In PvP, she still brings that tankiness and solid damage, but it's not quite as oppressive. Players have more options to avoid her attacks, so you need to be a bit more tactical to get the same impact. Next up is Maru, the hybrid defense and artillery expert. In PvP, she still shines with her long-range artillery damage. An Abyss and Gulf can make her tough to take down if used correctly. The catch is that her absorb moves are a little more predictable in PvP. Opponents can bait out her defenses or dodge them if they pay attention, so you need to time everything carefully. She rewards players who think a few steps ahead rather than just charging in blindly. Ningfei is the B-tier character who doesn't really change much between PvE and PvP. His crossbows can be a little situational, but if you take the time to aim them well, he can deal some surprisingly good damage in PvP. His shields and protection are still helpful, but he doesn't dominate the battlefield the way higher-tier PvP picks do. Overall, B-tier PvP characters are solid choices for players who like a mix of strategy and skill. Jolder is a reliable tank if you position her right, Maru brings long-range artillery flair, and Ningfei rewards precision and patience. They all have their strengths, but none of them are game-breaking. What's nice about B-tier is that you can still have fun and make plays without constantly worrying about being outclassed. You just need to be aware of each character's limitations and plan around them. In short, B-tier PvP is about balance. You get characters who can still shine, but it takes skill and smart play to extract their full potential. They aren't for beginners looking for easy wins, but for players willing to adapt, they can be extremely satisfying to use. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Atal, Kaber, and Wolf. Alright, now we're stepping into A-tier player versus player territory in Destiny Rising, where things start to feel a lot more reliable. These characters aren't just flashy, they actually give you real advantages in competitive matches. They can swing fights if you play them right, and they shine in ways that lower-tier characters simply can't match. Let's start with Atal. In player versus environment, her fusion weapons are a bit underwhelming, but in PvP, they actually perform quite well. Her support-oriented kit, which sometimes feels situational in PvE, becomes much more valuable when you are helping your team control the battlefield and provide buffs in short bursts. She's the kind of character where positioning and timing can turn a fight in your favor without relying purely on raw damage. Then there's Kaber, who suddenly looks a lot more useful in PvP than in PvE. His defensive abilities may have low uptime, but in fast-paced PvP encounters, they are surprisingly effective. Add in access to pulse rifles, which are incredibly strong in competitive play, and you have a character who can hold his own, poke safely from a distance, and survive tricky situations. Kaber rewards smart, tactical play, and he can be a real nuisance for opponents who underestimate him. Wolf is another A-tier standout for PvP. His mobility allows you to dodge and reposition constantly, and his damage carries over really well thanks to the auto rifle. On top of that, his grenade launcher is perfect for picking off enemies from safe angles, meaning you can chip away at health bars without overextending. Wolf gives you flexibility. You can push aggressively, play defensively, or mix both depending on the situation. Overall, A-tier PvP characters are all about versatility and skill expression. Atal thrives when you use her support abilities smartly, Caber excels when you balance defense with ranged firepower, and Wolf dominates when you combine mobility with precision. They are not broken, but they feel strong in almost any match. In short, picking an A-tier PvP character is about maximizing what they do best while exploiting opponents' mistakes. They are solid choices for competitive play, and if you master them, you will feel like you are always one step ahead on the battlefield. The characters in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Estella, Gwyn, Tantu, Ikora, and Umeko. Alright, welcome to the big leagues. S-tier player versus player characters in Destiny Rising. These are the legends that can dominate matches if used properly. Unlike lower tier characters, these heroes don't just survive, they control the battlefield, rack up kills, and make you feel like a total pro. Let's break down why they deserve the S-tier crown. Starting with Estella, her Dragon Super is an absolute game changer in PvP. The damage is insane, and if you time it right, you can stack kills like nobody's business. Combine that with access to pulse rifles for safe, long-range DPS, and you've got a character that can handle almost any situation. Estella excels at punishing groups of players and keeping control of key areas, making her terrifying in skilled hands. Gwyn is another S-tier monster, and her kit is basically designed for PvP. She has insane mobility, tons of damage, and great health sustain, which makes her hard to pin down. Shotguns can be tricky unless you close in safely, but sidearms let you poke and whittle down opponents from a distance before engaging. If you master her movement and know when to strike, she can dominate mid-range and close encounters alike. Then we have Tantu, a character who combines raw firepower with versatility. Access to both scout rifles and sniper rifles gives him some of the strongest PvP weapons in the game, if you can aim well, that is. His kit transitions smoothly from PvE to PvP, except that his super doesn't shine quite as much here. Still, his range dominance makes him a nightmare for anyone caught in open spaces. Ikora is basically the opposite approach. She is all about massive burst damage that can instantly take out players if you combo it correctly with weapons. Sustained damage doesn't matter when opponents have much less health than bosses, so Ikora's kit is perfectly tailored for quick kills and surprise engagements. Timing and positioning are everything with her, and pulling off combos can make her feel unstoppable. Umeko is the long-range assassin in this lineup. She shares the same weapon options as Tantu, allowing her to safely eliminate targets from a distance. Her kit is ideal for players who prefer to stay safe while picking off enemies with precision shots. Think of her as your sniper support, who can control lanes without overexposing herself. What sets S-tier PvP characters apart is that they all offer more than just one strength. Estella combines heavy AoE with safe range DPS. Gwyn mixes mobility, damage, and sustain. Tantu dominates with aim-heavy rifles. Ikora bursts down players instantly. And Umeko allows for safe long-range pickoffs. Each character feels like a complete package for competitive play. Another key thing is how they reward skill. These are not characters you can just spam. Using them effectively requires knowledge of range, timing, and positioning. But when you do master them, matches start feeling like they are entirely in your control. They are also extremely versatile. You can use Estella to pressure groups, Gwyn to outmaneuver foes, Tantu and Umeko to control sightlines, and Ikora to quickly eliminate key targets. Together they cover almost every aspect of PvP gameplay, which is why they are at the top. S-tier characters are also about consistency. Unlike lower tiers that have situational strengths and glaring weaknesses, these characters perform reliably under almost any circumstance. You know what they can do, and they deliver every time if you play smart. In short, picking an S-tier PvP character is like choosing a pro-level toolkit for domination. Whether you love AoE destruction, mobility and sustain, long-range sniping, or instant burst combos, there is an S-tier option for every style. Mastering them is challenging, but once you do, you're basically unstoppable. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.